الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين، صلى الله وسلم عليك يا رسول الله، صلى الله وسلم عليك يا أبا عبد الله، يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة. يا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. صدق الله العلي العظيم. وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد. It has been narrated from our eighth Imam, Al-Imam Ali ibn Musa al-Rida, salawatullah wa salamu alayh, that he observed his father, Al-Imam Musa al-Kadhim, salawatullah wa salamu alayh, that when the eve of the first of the month of Muharram would show up, that his father, Al-Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, was never to be seen publicly displaying joy and happiness, and that he would not smile and he would not laugh. He would not display that. And every day from the first all the way until the 10th of Muharram, his public display of sorrow and grief would increase day after day until the 10th day, the day of Muharram, the day of Ashura, in which he was most sorrowful, in which he would be overcome with grief, he would be overwhelmed with sorrow, and he would teach the followers of Ahlul Bayt that on that day, the day of Ashura, was the day that Imam Hussein alayhi salam was massacred, and that intentionally it was not a day of happiness, not a day of rejoice, but rather a day of sorrow and a day of sadness. So from the beginning of the month of Muharram, there is a build-up, there is an anticipation all the way up until the 10th day, which is the day of Ashura. And the Quran reminds us of this in a very general sense. In chapter number 103, Surah Al-Asr, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. So there's the mention of time, Asr, and of course God swears by time. The waw in the beginning of the first verse is waw al-qasam, which is when God wants to swear by something, he uses waw al-qasam. Wal-asr, he swears by time. And if you notice that word asr, in the Arabic language, it is used to describe the later portion of the day, the afternoon, when the day begins to wind down. So the asr prayer, for instance, is the prayer, the final prayer of the day that is done before the Maghrib time, before the sun sets. It's during the afternoon portion of the day, the final portion of the day. And within that name, we understand what it means. So if you take the word Asr, Ain, Sad, Ra, The verb asara in Arabic means to squeeze. So if you have a product that it's like squeezing the toothpaste out of the tube. It's whatever is left, the final part, it has to be squeezed out. And so in that meaning, there's a meaning of scarcity, meaning that there's not a whole lot which is left. So if you were to apply that to the general meaning of the word asr, which is time, because when God is swearing by wal asr in this verse, it's not just by the afternoon, but by time in general. Wal asr innal insana lafi khusr. Built into that meaning is the idea that this time that you, humanity, have on earth in itself is already scarce. It's not in abundance. It's not something that lasts forever. There's a certain portion of time that you live on this earth, that humanity lives on this earth, and that this earth exists. We know that this universe cannot be infinite, and this world that we live in, and this earth that we live on, cannot be infinite. It doesn't continue in an infinite matter. I mean, putting religion aside and putting faith aside and looking at it from a purely biological and geological point of view. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, because of that nature, of the fact that this asr, this time is scarce, because of that, innal insana lafi khusr. Understand that if you are not moving forward, you are moving behind. You are falling behind. And there's really nothing we can do to control time. Even the word time management, when we say time management is a misnomer because you can't manage time. The only thing you can manage is yourself. Nobody has more than 24 hours in a day. There's not a person on this earth that has 27 or 28 hours in a day. Someone who's very special or very lucky in that regard. And so there's very limited time. And so when your time comes to pass from this realm to another, there's nothing really that you can do in order to prevent that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, فَإِذَا جَاءَ أَجَلُهُمْ لَا يَسْتَأْخِرُونَ سَاعَةً وَلَا يَسْتَقْدِمُونَ. If their ajal, and some translate this word ajal into doom. If their doom is imminent, if it's impending, there's nothing that you can do in order to extend or even to hasten it. Which is interesting, because if you think of the loss of life, you would think, well, most people when they're faced with this reality, they want to extend it. They want a few more hours, a few more days, a few more moments. But there are people that are on the other side, that life becomes so painful for them that they don't want it. They don't want to live for another month. They don't want to live for another week. They don't want to live for another day. They want their life to be taken away from them right now. In fact, I was looking this up just recently, and there's a medical terminology that they use in some circles. They refer to the cases of imminent doom or impending doom. And there are certain situations where a person is faced with certain challenges health-wise that even though it's not life-threatening in itself, but they feel like they're about to lose their life. So if you've ever seen someone go through a very intense panic attack, or an anxiety attack, or intense depression, which is a state of mind, which also has its physical bearing. But physically, they're far from death. However, they see themselves as close to death. In fact, there are even some toxins and poisons which, when they enter the body, give the person a feeling that they are about to die, even though it's very treatable. There's a certain type of jellyfish that if you're unlucky enough to be stung by it, its poison doesn't only affect your body, doesn't only make you incapacitated and unable to move, but mentally it makes you believe that you're about to lose your life. That's the effect of the toxin. It's the effect of the poison. And this state is called imminent doom or impending doom. Sometimes, even when emergency responders, when they arrive to a scene of an accident, some of them they are trained to deal with a situation called imminent doom, where they know that nothing that they can do for this patient is going to extend their life. There's nothing that they can do. For instance, they know that they're about to fall into cardiac arrest, or that they're losing so much blood that there's nothing that you can do for this person. Imminent doom, imminent death. فَإِذَا جَاءَ أَجَلُهُمْ لَا يَسْتَأْخِرُونَ سَاعَةً وَلَا يَسْتَقْدِمُونَ. So it's really not guaranteed. This time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about, there's no quantifiable measure that is guaranteed. And I'll give you a personal story. I shared this story actually a week ago. Within our own community in Southern California, I had a friend, a classmate who I went to school with, who was the same age as me, who only 10 days ago was in the Kern River near Bakersfield, California. And this was a young man who was athletic. He put his feet into the river and the river took him away. It was on a Saturday and they found his body on a Thursday. He passed away. Nobody expected it to happen. Nobody knew that it was going to happen. He was an athletic young man. It had nothing to do with his ability to swim or not swim, because once the river takes you, that's it. The type of river that he fell into. So none of us are really guaranteed. The Quran tells us the story of the Prophet Sulaiman, a man who was a king, a man who had authority over men and jinn as well. If you read Surah Saba in the Quran, Surah Saba tells us the kind of power and the kind of authority that the Prophet Sulaiman had. But when he died, he was leaning over on his staff. He was overlooking his armies of men and jinn. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَمَّا قَضَيْنَا عَلَيْهِ الْمَوْتَ مَا دَلَّهُمْ عَلَى مَوْتِهِ إِلَّا دَابَّةُ الْأَرْضِ تَأْكُلُ مِنْ سَأَتَهُ. That when we decreed, قَضَيْنَا, when we decreed his doom, his imminent doom, there was nothing that could save him. And there was nothing that was an indicator to the armies of jinn that were working for him, except for the fact that a termite began to eat away at his wooden staff, and finally after a few days, he came crashing down like a tree. The way a tree comes down. You know, when they call out timber in the forest and it falls down. This was Sulaiman, the king of kings. So nothing hastens it and nothing delays it. Nothing that's within your control when your time has come. Time is the common denominator between everything in our life which is dear. Everything which has value. So if you look at the things in your life that have value, what are some of those things? Relationships. Relationships have the highest value. Number one, our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number two, our relationship with our nearest of kin, our parents, our grandparents, our family members, our siblings, our children. And then number three, our relationship with everybody else. Our neighbors, our smaller community, our larger community. Think about relationships and what enriches relationships. The number one factor is time. You can't purchase a relationship with God. You can't purchase a relationship with a parent. You can make them happy if you buy them certain things and they appreciate gifts, but that's very temporary. You can't purchase your relationship with your neighbors or your community. What is it that enriches your relationships? Is time. When you look at, for instance, your career, which is important to you, it's how much time you give to your career, which determines whether you have a fulfilling career or you don't have a fulfilling career. Some people, they give too little time, so that they're not being productive. And some people, they're giving too much time to where it is being counterproductive in other areas. It's being damaging in other areas. So if you think about it, the most expensive asset that you own is time. But unfortunately, it is the asset which is most elusive, meaning that it is running away from you. The more that you try to run after it, the more it seems to slip from your fingers. So I want to talk about time from a number of aspects. Number one is the aspect of worship. Obviously, as Muslims, we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mandated 5 times a day for our obligatory prayers. And those 5 times a day are spread throughout the day. Of course, there are other prayers which have specific times of the day and the night that they can be performed. And those are not mandatory, even though they are highly recommended, such as Salatul Layl, the night prayer. And the best time to perform the night prayer is between midnight and right before the Fajr prayer, right before the morning prayer. That is prime time. When it comes to prayer, what we are taught from the school of thought of Ahlul Bayt is to give prime time to prayer. Just like how there's prime time on TV. If you turn on the TV from the hours of 6 p.m. to 9 p.m., that's prime time. If you're producing a show, it's going to cost you more to have a show be broadcast during those hours than, for instance, the shows that are broadcast at 12 p.m. or 1 p.m., when most people are at work. And you notice a difference in quality if you turn on the TV at 12 p.m. versus if you turn it on at 7 p.m. There's a difference in quality in programming. That's called prime time. That's why you don't see major sporting events broadcast on a Wednesday at 3 p.m. because most people are at work. They broadcast them on a Saturday or a Sunday when most people are chilling at home and they want to watch something on TV and sort of escape from their weekly responsibilities, physically and mentally and emotionally and spiritually, just detach from everything. Likewise, when it comes to your prayers, the practice of the Prophet, and from the practice of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, we learn that there is a prime time. And I'll share one example with you. And this comes from the masterpiece, truly a masterpiece, which is the letter that Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam wrote to Malik al-Ashtar. He says the following. He says, وَاجْعَلْ لِنَفْسِكَ فِي مَا بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَ اللَّهِ, your relationship with God, place within that أفضل تلك المواقيت وأجزل تلك الأقسام. Take the best times. Now, who is Amir al-Mu'mineen communicating with? He's not communicating with a layman. He's communicating with Malik al-Ashtar, who is to be his representative, who is his right-hand man, who is his general, who is his administrator, who was to be his governor. He says that even though you have major responsibilities ahead of you, because it's not like Malik al-Ashtar was also coming to a position where everything was peaceful. No, there was political turmoil. There was a lot going on during that time, especially in Egypt, where he was appointed to lead. Even with that, Amir al-Mu'mineen, with his wisdom, he said, look, even with everything that you have going on, take the best of your times and establish your communion with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, even though when it comes to your times, there's no such thing as your time with God, because all time belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of your time, when you're in the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all of it belongs to Him. Sometimes we tend to compartmentalize our life. Work is here, family is here, friends are here, hobbies are here. Each one has their own space, each one has their own compartment, and none of them are allowed to interact with one another. That's why sometimes you see the father who, when it's his hobby time, when it's his fun time, he wants nothing to do with the family anymore. Because in his mind, he says, I've given enough of a responsibility to my family. Now it's me time. If you've ever heard of me time, I need some me time. And that's fine. We do need some me time, but the point is that the reason why a lot of people get disappointed and upset and burnt out is because they think that they have to have all of these separate compartments in their life and there's no interaction with them at all. And nothing can intrude on my hobby time. Nothing can intrude on my work time. I can't sacrifice family time no matter what. Even sometimes with family time, there is sacrifice, and I'll get to that. But Amir al-Mu'mineen says, take the best of your time. Because, you don't always feel good. You don't always feel at your prime throughout the day. There are some times of day where you're tired. There are some times where you're slacking. Sometimes where you feel lazy. He says, take the best of your time. Make it a priority. And we learned this from the life of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Imam Hussein, even on the day of Ashura, where there was fighting going on in the battlefield, even when there was not access to water for him to perform wudu, he sat on the floor of the battlefield alone and performed his prayer, even though the enemy was surrounding him. Why? Because that time, in his opinion, was the best time. So number one, when it comes to our worship. And this is based on the idea that, look, you're never too busy for something. Something that we have these days, a challenge, and it's really a mental cop-out if you think about it. When someone asks you to do something and you say, I'm busy. Instead of being busy, you need to ask yourself, am I being productive? It's easy to be busy. Life is going to get you busy. If you don't have something to do, you're going to be busy. But you need to ask yourself the question, rather than am I busy, is am I being productive? Most people, they're busy, but they're not really being productive. So this is time in one area, in the area of worship. Another area is in the area of family. And we all understand this common sense idea that to enrich your time with family, it's not about quantity, it's about quality. It's not about how much time is spent with them. It's about the time that you spend with them. Are you present? Are you there? Are you listening? Are you open? Are you understanding? Or are you doodling on your phone, speaking to somebody else? Now, you may think, okay, well, this is common sense, right? Quality time, you need to spend quality time with your family. But common sense is not really common practice, if you've noticed. Common sense is not common practice. Otherwise, we wouldn't really need to talk about any of the basics, any of the common sense things. But because common sense is not common practice, then you need a reminder. Now, here's the challenge with quality time. Quality time is not something you can necessarily plan for. Sometimes a conversation that a father needs to have with his son, or a father needs to have with his daughter, or a mother needs to have with her daughter or her son. Sometimes it's a spontaneous event. It's not like you can plan, I'm going to have this important conversation on Wednesday at 5:45 p.m. Sometimes it doesn't happen like that. If you've ever needed to have a crucial conversation with someone, you realize that it doesn't always go in the way that you plan. Sometimes you allot 5 or 7 or 10 minutes to a conversation, but then that conversation extends itself to 50 and 70 and 90 minutes. There was an author one day, he was writing about time management, and he was giving an example of his own son. He said that I had taught my son how to manage his schedule. That from the day before, manage your schedule, so that when you wake up that day, you know exactly what's on your schedule. And it's proven, by the way, if you try this, if you plan your day or plan your week 1 day or 1 week in advance, you're much more organized, your thoughts are much more organized, and you know what you need to do, and you're more likely to get the things that you need to get done throughout the day or throughout the week if you plan it in advance. But if you wake up in the morning and you have no idea what you want to do, that's why most people don't get anything that they want to get done. So he was teaching his son. So one day his son had set up his schedule, run this errand, make this phone call, go to the grocery store, all this stuff. Within that, he had written, he was planning to call someone to break off a relationship. And he had planned about 15 minutes for that. Sometimes we get very, very legalistic with the way that we want to do it. We get very managerial with the way, and sometimes it's a carryover from the way that we're taught to, accomplish at school or at work. So we carry that into our home, or we carry that into our other relationships. So he had set 15 minutes in order to call this person and break off a relationship with them. Well, what do you think happened with the 15 minutes? 15 minutes became almost 15 hours. Because something as delicate as a relationship, you can't just allot a time and say, this is the time that I'm going to dedicate. And this is not something which is a science, it's more of an art. It's something that you understand not just through knowledge, but you understand through wisdom. The more that you deal with people, the more that you work with people, the more you begin to develop grace and relationship skills and leadership skills in that regard. So one thing that I want to mention is that 2 principles when it comes to family time. Number 1 is a very, very simple equation. The equation, you don't have to be a rocket scientist or a math genius to understand this. But the equation is that time equals influence. If you want influence within your family, if you want influence within your community, what's the X factor there? It's time. So the opposite of that becomes what? Less time, less influence. Why do I mention that? So if you've learned the history of the United States, let's go back in time for a little bit. There was a time where children were, for the most part, raised by their parents throughout the entire day, throughout the entire week, throughout the entire month, throughout the entire year. If you go back before the Industrial Revolution, let's go back to the 1700s here in the United States. Before there was a formal schooling system, before you had, industries like factories that needed manpower. Here in the United States, 4 out of every 5 positions, the most famous, the most common position, the most common trade that a person had was what? If you can guess. 4 out of every 5. What was it? Does anybody know? Here in Ohio, you have it much more in California in different areas. Well, actually, I take that back. No, in California, it's much more. Farmer. Most people were farmers. 4 out of 5. So what was the 1 out of 5? Everything else. Blacksmith, goldsmith, tailor. In both of those situations, the way child rearing happened was that from a time the child was born up until age 5 or 7, they were taken care of by the mother. Once they reached around 7 years old, the son became an apprentice to his father. So if his father was a farmer, the son was working side by side with him. If the father was a blacksmith or a goldsmith, his son was working side by side with him. And it wasn't until, now the earliest document is in the 1600s, where the formal schooling system began, where children had to be put in school and separated from their parents. So now that 6 hours a day or 5 hours a day or 8 hours a day of time, that chunk of time was given somebody else, not the parents. So young men and young women who were raised by their parents didn't have the social issues that existed today. Such as what? Such as the identity crisis. The point is, to make a long story short, that the more time that you spend with someone, the more you're able to influence them. That's why as you're growing up, and my advice is to young people is, pay attention to the people that you spend the most amount of time with. Some people say, well, I can spend time with this person and they can't influence me. You're not that special, trust me. There's no way that you can spend an amount of time with someone without being influenced by them by some way, shape, or form. So think about the people that you're spending the most amount of time with. Now, some of you are thinking, well, I don't spend time with anyone. I spend time with my room. You're on your phone, you're on your laptop, you're on your iPad. The person that's on the other side of that, you're spending a lot of time with. The person that you're following on Snapchat and Instagram, that's your primary influencer, whether you like it or not. Even if you're following them out of curiosity, they begin to influence your subconscious mind whether you know it or not. So the simple equation is that time equals influence. The more time you spend someone, the more you're able to influence them. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that we stop taking our children to school? Well, some people have moved towards the model of homeschooling, and that works for them. That's not the point. The point is that we have to become very, very intentional with the time that we spend with people. Some parents, and I'll speak about parenting styles in one of the coming nights, they believe that it is their responsibility to be their child's best friend. Your child doesn't need another best friend. Your child needs a father figure. Your child needs a mother figure, a nurturer. Your child needs someone who, if the world shuts them down, you lift them up. Your child needs someone who, if the world teaches them falsehood, you teach them truth. Your child needs someone who, if the world shows them darkness, you show them light. And you're not willing to compromise on those values. So time, my friends, this commodity that is slipping away from us on a daily basis, time is what enriches our life. It is what enriches our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Time is what enriches our relationships with the people around us. The point is we have to become very, very strategic with our time. One writer, he says the following. He says, there's a lot of things that you like to do in your life. He says, write to lists. A lot of us, we write a to-do list, right? And most of the time, the to-do list does not get taken care of. He says, instead of just writing a to-do list, be a little bit more specific. Write 2 lists. Write a like to-do list. These are the things that I like to do. And then write a have to-do list. These are the things that I have to do. And most of the times, we don't get through our to-do lists is because we don't know, or we can't differentiate between the things that we have to do versus the things that we like to do. And the reason we can't do that is because we don't know what our values are and what our principles are. Most of the time we're behaving out of desire. So we mix desire with value. And sometimes the things that you value are not necessarily the things that you desire. We can dedicate another lecture to that. That's a much, much deeper talk. But understanding that you need to be strategic with your time. I'll give you an example. Is everyone familiar with the name Richard Branson? You know who Richard Branson is. The owner of Virgin America, Virgin Atlantic, multi-billionaire. There's a story, they say that one time he was asked to come into an organization and give a speech, give a talk for an hour and a half. And so because this organization could not get through him directly, they went through another party. So this party contacted him. They said that there's this organization that wants to invite Richard Branson. They want him to give a talk for an hour and a half. They want an hour and a half of his time, and they're willing to pay him $100,000. The secretary said, no, sorry, he can't do it. So, it's, I go up, you go down. They thought it was that sort of thing. They said, okay, $250,000 for an hour and a half of his time. The reply came back, no can do. They said, okay, we can play that game. $500,000 we're willing to give him, and we will fly out our own private jet to go pick him up, and as soon as he's done, drop him back off. He said, no, absolutely not. So at this point, they were frustrated, this organization. What's going on? They explained, the people that were representing him, they said that he has 3 strategic objectives that he wants to complete now. It's on his have to do list. And we've been given strict instructions that whatever comes across his way, if it's an idea, a project, a business, an investment, a speaking opportunity, whatever that comes across that has nothing to do with his strategic objectives, we've been given strict orders to reject it, no matter how much there is in compensation. This is somebody who has focus. This is somebody who knows his priorities in life. This is someone whose time is so valuable, it's worth to him more than $500,000. Now, you don't have to be the CEO of a company to think like this. You don't need to own an airline to think the way that he is thinking. There are certain objectives that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed within your life that you need to get done in your life and that nobody else is going to get done except for you. And time, asr, is constantly being squeezed away from you. It's constantly becoming more scarce and more scarce. So when you think about what I need to do, one way is to put pen to paper, which is a tradition that most people have forgotten today because we have a phone. But there's a difference between writing something on your phone and writing something using a pen and putting it on paper. What are some of your objectives in life? What are some of your objectives when it comes to your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? With your wife or husband, with your children, with your parents, with your community. What are some of those strategic objectives that are so valuable that even if someone gave you $1 million, you would not walk away from them? That it requires your prime time. It requires your most prime energy. What are some of those objectives? The season of Ashura is a season in which we constantly remind ourselves of our objectives as individuals, as family members, as community members. And this is where we draw the vision. You know, in pop culture, there's a New Year's resolution. Our New Year's resolution doesn't necessarily take place on January 1st. It's on the first of the month of Muharram, which marks the new year. A year in which Imam Hussein alayhi salam understood what his principal objectives were. And if you study his life, you realize that he was so clear with his intentions. There was no room for vagueness. I mean, nobody can look back to the life of Imam Hussein now and say, well, he really wasn't clear on his objectives. He was completely clear on his objectives. He was crystal clear on his objectives. And Imam Hussein alayhi salam knowing who he was, knowing what he stood for, when the offer came for him to pledge allegiance to Yazid ibn Muawiyah, he was summoned to the home of the governor, to the palace of the governor in Medina, and he was asked to pledge allegiance. And he took with him the young men of Banu Hashim. And he understood his position. He knew the household that he was born in and where he came from. And that's why when they made the offer to him, he refused. And his justification was that, look at Yazid. Look at the type of person that Yazid is. Yazid is a murderer. He is a drunkard. He is a womanizer. He has no sanctity and no respect for life. He does not honor the basic human freedoms. And he listed a number of his open faults, open flaws, and he says, وَمِثْلِي لَا يُبَايُعْ مِثْلَهُ. A man like me does not pledge allegiance to a man like him, because I know where I am from. I know the family that I emerge from. I know the principles. I know what my priorities are in life. And how can a person like him, who dances with the monkeys, expect someone like me to put hand in hand and to pledge allegiance to him? And of course, Imam Hussein alayhi salam, at that moment, he realized that time was slipping away from him. That it would only be a matter of time, because of the prophecy that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had given so many years earlier. He knew that it was only a matter of time that he had to face that ultimate reality. But he still had a mission. He did not give up. And that's why before departing from Medina to Mecca, he went to the grave of his mother Fatima. He went to the grave of his grandfather Rasulullah. He went to the grave of his brother Al-Imam Al-Hasan Al-Mushtaba alayhi salam. And he spent some time there. He knew that this was going to be his final time. Narrations tell us that as he was spending time there, because of his exhaustion, he was so exhausted that he fell asleep. And in his sleep, he saw a dream. He saw Rasulullah. Rasulullah said to him, Ya Hussein, Anta rahilun ilayna ajila. He said, you are on your path to us in a very speedy way. It is only a matter of time before you come to us, before we meet to one another. And it is in this state, brothers and sisters, that Imam Hussein alayhi salam gathered his caravan, his loved ones, his family members, to embark on this journey. Of course, not everybody could embark on this journey. There were a number of family members who stood behind. Narrators mention one of his daughters, Fatima Sughra, who stood behind, who was too sick. Baneen, a mother who was like his own mother, who was not his biological mother, but was like his own mother, who loved him like her own son, also stayed behind. His brother Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiya, who he had written his wasiyah to, his directive. These were the people that stayed behind as Imam Hussein alayhi salam prepared for that final journey, never to return again to Medina. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد.